Today's episode is sponsored by EditPods. EditPods provide full-service podcast editing that's all in one podcast editing without breaking the bank. Now, one of the biggest problems that I have when running this podcast is the time it takes to edit, clip, upload, and post my podcast in all of the right places with some new artwork, links, descriptions, and all of the jazz that comes along with it. Now, what EditPods do is help podcasters skip all the hassle and focus directly on making the best show possible, freeing our minds to help hone the craft instead of spending time writing copy and doing transcripts and finding links, all of these time-consuming activities. So, EditPods work with podcasters that want to focus their time on areas of excellence and take the rest off their plate. If that sounds good to you, you can use the coupon code CHATTER to get $30 off Basic or Plus, or $50 off of Premium for the first month. That's CHATTER, CHATTER, for $30 or $50 off your first month at EditPods. Make podcasting fun again. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today, I have the absolute pleasure to be joined by science and history author Andrew Collins, who is the co-author of a brand new book with Gregory Little, Origins of the Gods. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh. Yes, pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, not a problem. Ever since I first came across Graham Hancock, the idea of A, ancient civilizations, and B, the fact they were probably smarter than most people give them credit for has been like fascinating to me. So then when I started coming across some of your lectures, I was completely fascinated watching, especially I think the first one I ever watched was you talking about Göbekli Tepe and the Denisovans, and I was just like watching it being like, why has no one ever told me these things? So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you about your new book. So to begin with, I thought we'd start with just getting you to talk about shamanism, what it is, and sort of where it originated for you, so that we can start from there and build on.
Well, shamanism is present in cultures all the way around the world, mostly indigenous, of course, and in the past it would have been practiced much more. The most famous area that we know associated with it is, of course, Siberia, and the remote parts of the sort of far eastern part of Russia, and of course, and also Central Asia as well. There's plenty of it there, and even in Tibet. I mean, Tibetan Buddhism, in many ways, rose up out of the ashes of shamanism that was already present, in the Tibetan plateau, but the idea of a shaman is somebody, a special person in a community who is able to bridge the link between this world and the next. And what they will do is to travel into otherworldly realms that are thought to coexist with our own and are normally invisible, and to communicate with the intelligences that are thought to inhabit such realms. Now, I mean, they can take any form, but for the most part, they're generally associated with the ancestors, the ancestors of the particular culture or particular family or particular social group. But beyond that, it can be anything from the animals, the spirits of the animals that were killed on hunt, for instance. There was a symbiotic relationship between, many tribes, many communities and the animals that they killed. And the spirits of those animals would continue to talk to them even after they were slaughtered. And they used, their skins, their body, their meat, all the rest of it in every way. So there was this relationship. But the bigger question, of course, is the intelligences that these shamans are supposed to be connecting with. Are they real or not? In other words, are there real intelligences out there that are non-corporeal, invisible? If they are real, what impact have they had on us, not just through shamans, but on human consciousness, human progress, and human evolution since the beginning, since, we rose up out of Africa 2 million years ago?
So that's really like the most compelling question, I think, that arises from any of the stuff that I've read of yours about shamanism is this idea that whether they're speaking to something that's real or whether it's like a deeper part of the human psyche that was accessed. So I wondered if there is any indication of the kind of drugs or hallucinogens or anything that they were ingesting at that time that was sort of inducing, or rituals that was inducing the kind of visions or communication with these spirits that we maybe have any idea about, or have any way of replicating or understanding in the modern day, as to like, is it, because obviously people talk about entities when they take DMT or other different hallucinogens. I was wondering if there's any sort of parallels that we can draw to things that we could experience in the modern day.
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, I think it's important to point out that hallucinogens, psychoactive plants, whatever, are obviously one way that a shaman can more easily enter an altered state of consciousness, and through that communication with the other worlds. However, it's not the only one, of course. I mean, sensory deprivation is another. Going down into caves, hypoxia is another. In other words, starving yourself of oxygen. Death rituals are another, throwing yourself off a cliff, with your leg tied to rope, stuff like this. Death and rebirth experiences also trigger altered states of consciousness. So, it's not the only way. But having said that, I mean, clearly there's evidence all over the world of shamans using all types of psychoactive plants and obviously mushrooms. But I think that for us, it probably began in Africa as much as 1.75 million years ago. And I say that because that's when we invented fire. When I say we, I mean our Homo erectus predecessors. And they would have had fires in caves, which would have been sustained by putting on all sorts of dry plants and things like this. And at some point, there's no question that they would have put on plants that were psychoactive, and they would have had the effects of them, not realizing what was going on. But very gradually, they would have started to understand that if they put certain types of plants on fire, then it's going to have an effect on them. It would send them into a shifted or an altered state of consciousness. And the reason why this is important to actually pin down when this occurred is because there was a huge change in the way that we made stone tools. Up to about 1.75 million years ago, what we do is we pick up a pebble from a river or something, and we just smash it and, create some kind of jagged rock, which would then be used as a tool. And there was no cohesion in style whatsoever. But after 1.75 million years ago, we start making the most beautiful works of art in stone tools, what's known as the Acheulean hand axe, which was created by our lower Paleolithic ancestors. And these are like multifaceted jewels. In fact, I think I have one on the table here.
Oh, wow.
I do, yeah. If any of your viewers can see that, that's what's known as an Acheulean hand axe. It's multifaceted, and it's in a style. That's probably about 1 million years old. So not as old as the ones I'm talking about, but still very old. And these were manufactured almost exactly the same style, and they were referred to as the Swiss Army knife of their age, right the way through until around 200,000 years ago, when tool manufacturing changed because of new peoples coming in, doing different things, new types of animals to kill and whatever. So this was an important demarcation in our understanding of technology, innovation and art, and it coincides with us inventing fire for the first time. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And this is the first of many indications that contact and communication with otherworldly realms during altered states of consciousness are probably been crucial to our rise in civilization. I mean, the great studier of psychedelics, Terence McKenna, did a book called The Food of the Gods. I can't remember exactly when it came out, now 70s, 80s, which said similar things, that civilization almost certainly exists because of hallucinogens, mushrooms in particular. And of course, at that time, it was just dismissed as a hippie theory, hippie idea. But I mean, looking at it now with all the evidence that we actually have, to do with the rise and the progress of civilization, I see no reason not to see hallucinogens as having had a very major influence on the way that we are today.
Yeah, what I found really interesting was the suggestion that these geometrically shaped axes and tools were because of the kinds of geometric shapes that you would see whilst tripping on,
exactly.
which I had never thought about, which is fascinating. But like the thing that blows my mind the most is the age of which you're talking that these things are, because I don't know, I maybe probably wasn't like thinking quite as like narrow-mindedly as, but you know, everything's like, okay, everything happened like 6,000 years ago, and that before that people were idiots who knew which plants to eat. Like that's basically the way that I don't know, maybe used to think about these things. And then like the longer it goes on, and the more evidence that comes out like every year, that it seems like smart, intelligent beings are older and older and older and older and older than we could possibly believe. So like you kind of pinpoint, is it the Qesem Cave or Qesem Cave in Qesem Cave in Israel? Why do you think that specifically, like what is it about that cave is that makes you believe that that's the birthplace of like shamanism, and or maybe like the first recorded example of it?
Well, it's another one of these demarcation points in human evolution where everything changes. I mean, the cave itself is in Israel, just outside of Tel Aviv. As you get into what's known as the Sumerian Hills, and beyond them is the Palestinian West Bank. It was discovered, as I say, in 2000 when they were building a new highway, and they were blasting the rocks in front of them. And suddenly they realised that they'd come across this huge area of debris of stone tools and bones. And what they have to do at this point is shut everything down, go to the authorities. And then what happens is that an archaeological institution, organisation has to put in a bid for excavation work. And the one that with the lowest bid, it's going to cost the lowest amount of money, will actually get it. And it was the archaeologists from Tel Aviv University that won it, which they really, really wanted. That's why they put in the lowest bid. Because what they realised here was a time capsule between 400,000 and 200,000 years ago of human activity. And when I say human, I mean human, because so far the teeth that have been found in this cave are the same as ours. So, whoever these people were, they are our most ancient ancestors. Now, I was aware of this cave for a few years, but then something happened in 2019 that made me drop everything and go out to Israel. And this was the fact that they discovered a swan wing bone. Now, that might not sound very exciting to most people, but it was in an area of the cave that was seemingly reserved for special activity. It had clearly been modified in the fact that the feathers had been removed, and it had been obviously cleaned, and the marks were there to show that this was the case. But the importance about this particular bone is that it is well known in shamanism that if you want to attain what's known as shamanic flight, you take the form of a bird. It can be any bird. It can be an eagle, a hawk, but also a swan. And swans are a universal symbol of shamanic flight. And so the archaeologists that are working on the site wrote a paper, really sensible paper, basically suggesting that this was the earliest evidence anywhere in the world of shamanism. In other words, people who were deliberately trying to exit the physical plane and go into otherworldly environments to communicate with the intelligences that are there. Now, for me, this was very exciting because I'd written books about shamanic flights, swans, their connection with the stars and the sky, particularly the Cygnus constellation. So all this was like manna from heaven for me. But what was more significant is the fact that at the same time that these people were practicing shamanism, which let's point out was nearly 400,000 years ago, they were also becoming the smartest people on the planet. I mean, so many firsts in innovation are credited to the Qesem people. For instance, they had the earliest canned food, and I don't mean canned food in our sense, but what they would do is they would chop the legs off deer that they killed in the hunt. They would wrap them in a certain way that would preserve the valuable marrow inside the bone for several weeks, possibly much longer even. They created what the earliest freeze-dried food. Again, not what we would think of, but what they did was that they would get meat, and as soon as it was chopped from the carcass, it would be cured in a particular way using fire ash, and this would again preserve it for many weeks. They had the earliest production of a certain type of stone tools known as blades. They had the earliest school of rock, and these are terms, by the way, that the media have called all these things. I didn't make it up.
Rock. That's amazing.
and basically what it meant was there was a whole teacher-pupil relationship where, pupils would come in, learn how to, make certain tools. And there were different areas of the cave that were designated for different purposes. Plus, there was sustained fire for the use across tens of thousands of years in a fire pit, which is still there today. And when I was there, I mean, you can, just sort of scrape it and you think, God, this could have happened just a few years ago. You know what I mean? And yet this hearth is, as much as 300,000 years ago. I mean, it's extraordinary stuff. And so, I mean, there are many other firsts as well. Now, these may not sound rock and roll to most people, but, and this is the big but, these people were becoming smarter than anybody else on the planet, and they invented shamanism. Now, tell me that there is not a link between all of this, because surely there is. And I think that what was happening is that these people were entering into these otherworldly environments, communicating with the ancestors, the spirits of the animals. And again, this is not my idea. Ram Bakai, who is one of the main archaeologists working at the Qesem Cave, this is what we shared together. These ideas and thoughts that he has. So he has to be a little bit careful. They're a little bit, left field as far as archaeology is concerned. But that's the way archaeologists are coming to think of this, that these people were genuinely communicating with intelligences that were giving them information that they were able to bring back to the community, that was allowing them inspiration in different areas. And this is how important this type of communication is. Now, that's a great story, but this is only just the beginning, because if you go to the Qesem Cave and you look towards the east, you see in the distance a mountain. And that mountain, I mean, it's not very apparent, but when you know what that mountain is, it becomes incredibly important, because it appears in the early part of the Bible as the dwelling place of the God of the Israelites. It's said to be his house, his Bethel. And it's here that the earliest patriarchs like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all went and communicated with the God that would later be called Yahweh, of course. And it's said that the way that God appeared on this mountain was in his form as the Shekinah. Now, the Shekinah is a term which, the exact word just means presence, the presence of God, but it's generally always used to refer to a blinding light. So God appearing, manifesting as a light, just like Moses encountered on Mount Horeb when he encountered the burning bush, when he went up Mount Sinai and encountered God as this sort of like terrifying, devouring fire, which could be seen by even the Israelites down in the valley below. And it's also the term that's used for the light that appeared above the Ark of the Covenant, which we should remember was actually a box that allowed the Israelites to communicate with God and allowed God to be temporarily moved around in this box so that he could communicate with them, and that information had actually come when Moses was on the top of Mount Sinai. He was given the Ten Commandments and the tablets of the law, but he was also given at the same time the instructions on how to make the Ark of the Covenant. So that's just a little aside there. But going back to our friends at Qesem, the interesting thing here is that the people from the Qesem Cave and another local site called Jal Julia would seemingly go to this mountain, which is called Mount Gerizim, to actually get a particular type of flint that they'd bring back and use to create their stone tools. Now, this was despite the fact that all around them was adequate, tool-making flint that they could have used. So why would they want to go all this way? And it follows a pattern that suggests that these people had a special interest in this mountain. So can we dare to suggest that these Qesem people were also interested in this mountain because of something that was happening there? Well, I looked into this mountain and I found that there is, both in historical times and in modern times, evidence of the manifestation of mysterious lights on this mountain. And so, I wanted to find out more. So I went there. I went to Mount Gerizim and I climbed it. And on the top, there is a community that lives to this day there called the Samaritans. And of course, this is nothing to do with the people that help you out when you've got a problem. The Samaritans claim to be the true descendants of the Israelites. They got their own form of the Bible, which is allegedly even older than the Hebrew Bible. And they follow a different and very ancient form of Israelite religion. Anyway, I went to see them and I spoke to one of the highest priests of the community. And we got chatting and I said to him, I understand that, strange lights, what in modern terms you would call UFOs or UAPs would manifest. And he said, oh, yes. And I said, well, what are they? How do you interpret them? What are they to you? And the word that he used was malach, which basically means angels. It's a Hebrew term. It's an Arabic term that means angels. So in other words, the mysterious lights, the objects that would be seen in the vicinity of this, glowing objects, which to us we might interpret as, flying saucers or something. To these people, they are the messengers of God. They are the manifestations of angels. And I find this quite incredible because this is, just the stuff of ancient astronaut theories or ancient alien theories, which, my good friend Eric von Daniken first talked about in books like Chariots of the Gods back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And, what's nice for me as far as a cycle is concerned is that Eric von Daniken's actually written the foreword to this new book, Origins of the Gods, which, I think for me is a sort of a synergy, which I like, basically, because I believe I'm taking this subject onto the next level, something that he himself started with books like Chariots of the Gods in the 60s.
So one of the questions, and I've been talking a lot to one of my close friends about this of late. Anytime that, say, in like ancient writing, like you talk about the Bible or anything, when people talk about like angels or demons appearing to them, then there's always been this suggestion that possibly it's aliens or it's interdimensional beings, and this was like a thing that was, I don't know, it was sort of, it's talked about but maybe not like considered to be like the most mainstream view of what people were talking about then. But I think it's probably quite possible that lights and things like this have appeared, and that's how it was described by people who don't have another frame of reference. But like my question is always, do you think these are angels or are they demons?
Well, both, I think, is the answer. But I mean, all of what we see is interpreted by us based on our cultural and religious upbringing, because this phenomena has been with us, I think, since the beginning. I think that the Qesem Cave people were seeing lights in connection with this mountain, which is one of the reasons why they were attracted to it. There are mountains all over the world where mysterious lights are seen. I visited them in China, in Greece, places like Mount Athos, in California, Mount Shasta, many other places, and it's all the same. They are places where mysterious lights, what we call UFOs or UAPs is the term that the US military and government seem to want to call them today, which means, the unidentified aerial phenomena. They all produce these lights. And at the same time, people visit them and they have transformative experiences. They find themselves in communication with intelligences. They make that connection. And I think that this is something that happened as early as 400,000 years ago in Israel at the Qesem Cave, that the people there went to Mount Gerizim. They saw these lights, connected with them in some manner, and then felt that they should continue these communications, and that their shamanism, part of that was to communicate with however they perceived the intelligences associated with them, whether they saw it as an entity, a deity or whatever. And I think that what we should remember here is that the Israelites came to conclude that these lights were visible manifestations of Yahweh himself. In other words, this was the foundation point in many ways of the worship of God, the God that eventually becomes the God of the Christians. So in other words, Eric von Daniken's idea of was God an astronaut in some ways was sort of correct, in the sense that God may well certainly be associated with mysterious light phenomena, light forms, which then begs the question of what are they? Can we try and define what they are? And I think that the key here is that I'm going to say as much as 70% of these UFOs, let's call them that for the moment, are essentially lights, objects of light, glowing objects of light, whether they be big, small, clusters of lights, appear to have structure, whatever. That's what they are. Now, what is light? Obviously at the beginning of the Bible, it says, let there be light. What is light? Well, light is photons. But more importantly is that many UFOs, and this goes back, decades, people started to realize that they were appearing only, well, I say only, more frequently at certain locations more than any others. And very early, people started to think that, these UFOs could manifest there because of something special to do with the landscape involved. And people did even start to suggest things like maybe it's to do with magnetism or something like this. But it wasn't really until the early 1980s that people started to really work out what was going on. And that was the fact that the areas where UFOs most frequently occur, which we today call portals, that's the modern term that's used, have very intense geologies. And this is a geology that usually involves tectonic stress going on deep down in the earth, pressure on tectonic, not just the tectonic plates, but also fault lines, and different types of rock which, when put under pressure, will produce electricity. In other words, flows of electrons, going from higher to lower potential. And again, this doesn't sound very, exciting, but what happens is that these electrons, of which we are dealing with, countless amounts of them, rise up from the ground into the local environment and create what is scientifically known as electron bursts. This in turn produces something called ionospheric conditions. And when this occurs, what happens is that plasma manifests. Now, what is plasma? Plasma is the fourth state of matter. We all know about solids, we all know about liquids, we all know about gases, but the fourth state of matter is plasma, and this is created when electrons start splitting away from atoms. And this is exactly what happens in these environments. And when they split away, they get very excited, that's the term that's used, and they start bashing into other atoms, forcing them to free their electrons, and it becomes a chain reaction. At the same time, they generate electromagnetic fields around them, and suddenly, boom, it's like switching on a light bulb. There's an object of light, and the reason that it's a light is because these electrons, when they're excited, produce photons. They release photons of energy. So suddenly you have objects of light in front of you. Now, again, this is something that's been known to science for, well, certainly probably for 200 or 300 years, that if you create certain stresses and strains in the earth, it will produce light. Often they're seen before earthquakes. I mean, this is an accepted phenomena. But it seems that you can take it one step further to say that the environments in which UFOs appear, and I say not all, we're not talking about everyone, we're not talking about flying saucers from another planet here, we're talking about most objects that are interpreted as UFOs can manifest within these environments, and that most of them will be plasma. Plasma can be invisible, by the way. It can be solid, it can be picked up on radar, but most important, and by the way, plasma is the light of the sun, for instance. It is it's produced by black holes, neutron stars. It creates lightning. That's what lightning is, plasma. Ball lightning is plasma. And what happens is, this is the important bit, is that it was long noticed ago that plasma seems to come alive as if it has sentience or intelligence. And this is not just in scientific experimentation, but also out there when these objects appear. They seem to have a sentience. They seem to have a connection with anybody that seems to observe and interact with them. And this is something that you find again and again with people that have UFO encounters, that there is a relationship built up between them and the object whilst it's there, and they feel they know who, this object. They feel that they connect with it as if they've known it all their life, and will then spend most of the remainder of their life trying to reconnect with it or sustain that connection. I mean, this is something that I've seen again and again with UFO witnesses. Now, that's going to be a little bit more difficult to explain, other than the fact that I genuinely believe that we are dealing with a sentience here, a sentience that somehow comes in to occupy plasma environments once they exist. In other words, what we call UFOs could actually be alive. They could actually be the entity. They could be the being. And again, nothing new. I mean, people like, there was a guy called Trevor James Constable that came up with these ideas back in, I think, the 60s, books that came out in the 70s, Cosmic Pulse of Life. He believed that UFOs were themselves, life forms that existed up in the upper atmosphere. But, we're refining it and linking it now very specifically with science, because there was a theoretical physicist by the name of David Bowen. He came across to here from America, spent most of his time doing experimental work places like Bristol University. And he studied plasma. He also came to the conclusion that it was alive and that some kind of intelligence could inhabit plasma environments. And he believed that these intelligences were coming up from what he referred to as a deeper level of existence, something that was outside of space-time, some kind of what would be referred to in science as a non-local medium. In other words, it's outside of the air and space that we deal with on a general basis. And he came to call this deeper level of existence the implicate order. He believed that it was behind creation in the universe, but his colleague Basil Hiley referred to this same realm as the pre-space. In other words, that which is beyond the space that we know. And this seems to be where these intelligences come from. Now, what does that mean? Where do they come from? Where do they exist? Where do they go? Well, this is the interesting fact, is that plasma recently has been hypothesized by various theoretical physicists has an extra dimension of space within it. In other words, the world that we live in all the time has 3 dimensions of space, and one of time. Time obviously moving in one direction, forward. But plasma could well have an extra dimension of space. There's good reasons for this, very, very good reasons. I go into all of this in the book. But if that's correct, then it starts linking us with theories that are suggesting that there are higher dimensional realms that coexist with us. The best theory of that right now is what's known as M theory, which is an area of string theory which has taken it onto a new level, really. It was created in the mid-1990s by a physicist by the name of Ed Witten. And what this suggests is that before the Big Bang, before our universe was created, there was a realm that existed known as the bulk, B-U-L-K, the bulk. And this was an 11-dimensional environment. And of those 11 dimensions, 6 of them are what's known as compactified, which means they're scrunched up in very, very tiny balls, and you wouldn't even notice that they were there. Now, on top of that, you have 4 dimensions of space and 1 of time, although the time dimension wouldn't necessarily be the same as our time. Almost certainly, it wouldn't just move forward. It would be all time altogether, basically. In other words, there would be the ability to access any part of it at any time. Now, if plasma does act as a conduit or a medium into this higher dimensional realm, which, sorry, I've forgotten a bit. Let's get into the creation of the universe. It's believed that our universe has blown up like a bubble inside the bulk, and that this is created possibly by what they refer to as white holes, which are the opposite of black holes, that produce plasma that quickly becomes atomic matter or nuclear matter and blows up and expands outwards to create the physical universe in which we live with its own laws of physics. But it's also believed that there are other of these universes. The term they use for them is branes, B-R-A-N-E, or brain worlds. And that these brain worlds, of which, our universe is one, there could be many of them. And each of them with their own laws of physics. But it's possible also, it's been predicted, that they may actually touch each other. In other words, they may, come together, or they may even overlay each other, or they may overlay each other temporarily, like come together and go apart, come apart, whatever. Now, all of this is therefore suggesting that we exist within a 11-dimensional environment, but we're only ever aware of the 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, and that plasma itself could be a conduit back into this 11-dimensional realm. And if that's the case, and that's where these intelligences come from, then is it possible that we are dealing with transdimensional intelligences, transdimensional consciousness? The term we like to use is n-dimensional beings, or n beings for short, with the n standing for number. And the reason why it's just number is because we don't know exactly how many dimensions might be involved. It could be 4, could be 5, could be 11, although some theories suggest there could be 22 dimensions or even 32 or more. So n for number. In other words, all we can say is that we're dealing with higher dimensional intelligences here. And if that's the case, we don't stand a hope of truly perceiving them or understanding them, because, with 3 dimensions, if you just had 2 dimensions, you would live in a flat world, flatlander, to borrow a term, and everybody would be flat. And if you tried to put a 3-dimensional object, like a ball, for instance, through their flatland, all they would see is a circle opening up until it reached the full size of the ball. And as the ball passed through, that circle would gradually close up until there would be nothing there. So all they would see of a ball is a circle. And it's in other words, they would never be able to perceive a three-dimensional reality. It's the same for us. We're three-dimensional creatures in space, that is. We would never be able to perceive a four-dimensional being or a four-dimensional object. I mean, we can try and construct it using geometry, but that is simply in a three-dimensional plane. We cannot take it beyond that. We cannot truly see what's out there in a higher dimensional state. We could see something, and I think that if we look at UFOs, for instance, and the occupants, the light beings, whatever it is that you see as coming from them, we're seeing something, and we're interpreting it in terms of aliens coming down from another world. But that's us. That is the product of our technological age. Since the atomic bomb of the Second World War and Roswell, in 1947, and all of this has meant that we perceive all UFOs as extraterrestrial spacecraft made of nuts and bolts. And this has to stop, in all honesty, because I think if we carry on this way, we would never going to truly understand this UFO phenomena, particularly as we're getting to a very crucial time in our understanding of it, where you've got these incredible US Navy videos that have been released in recent years that have been authenticated.
Do you think that we're seeing like UFOs, or do you think we're seeing like America flex about its military? Because I ask a lot of people this question.
I mean, the main three possibilities relating to those videos is that it's some tech that the Americans created and have been keeping secret for 70 years, 80 years. That's when the flying saucer era started. Or it could be from a foreign nation, Russia, China, North Korea, or whatever, and that they are sending these things over to spy on the US military. Or it could be something else, other, if you like. And I've seen lots of programs, as I'm sure you have, and I'm sure your viewers have as well, that that talk about this in terms of technology. It's always technology. But is it? I mean, they talk about them doing 90-degree turns suddenly, or suddenly reversing and going back. I mean, and they're saying our technology couldn't do that. That means these people must be, hundreds of years more advanced than that. Why think in this mechanistic, technical way all the time? Why not look at the possibility that these things are higher dimensional in nature? In other words, they have the dimensions that we know and love, but they also have at least one other dimension with them, and we are barely able to perceive exactly what is going on here. And I think in many ways, this is what worries, US military, the US government, think tank, corporate think tanks and things like this, who are all very much aware of what's happening out there, but haven't really got full answers, in all honesty. I mean, yes, they've got some evidence. I don't think they've got any downed flying saucers personally. But
they claim they have. That's what they claim. That's what.
But hold on. The idea of downed saucers has been used as misinformation by both America and Russia since the 1950s.
Yeah.
Now, I could be wrong.
That's what the New York Times said. Like,
I would like to be proved wrong. I mean, I've been to Roswell. I was on a pilgrimage.
Nice.
And it's not what I expected. I was very, very disappointed with Roswell.
Really?
Oh God, it's a terrible place. But no disrespect to the people of Roswell. But I mean, what I mean by that is that it's so tacky, it's ridiculous. I mean, there are aliens, blow up aliens in virtually every shop window, huge, great flying saucers over the top of shops and stuff like this. It's very, very tacky.
What's the hotel called? The little alien, right?
Well, yeah, but that's the little alien that's Area 51.
Okay.
My story of Area 51, you'll have to say for another episode, I'm afraid, because that was I nearly killed myself going there, literally. But anyway, look, I want to believe.
I'm
a Mulder. I want to believe, but And the big but is that we are dealing with two things here, I think. One, there is the possibility of extraterrestrials visiting this planet. And this was something that Carl Sagan, the great cosmologist, even wrote a paper about as early as 1963. And he concluded that we would have been visited, literally multiple times across the course of humanity. But the big question is the impact of those visitations on civilization, human progress. That's the awkward question which nobody can really answer. But on the other side of it, I think that you have these transdimensional intelligences that are responsible for the sentience and the actions of many UFOs. And we need to start understanding their existence, because I think that they've been around since the beginning, certainly since the age of the Qesem Cave. And I do believe that it was the inhabitants of the Qesem Cave who were in touch with these same intelligences as much as 400,000 years ago. That's a big leap, I know, but it's a hypothesis that I want to put out there, because I think we've got to move forward with this. We've got to start thinking outside the box if we truly want to know what we're dealing with here.
Okay, so I have two main sort of like lines of questioning here, so I'm just going to try and like shove them together and see if you can like, sew the answers together. So, what about the way that plasma interacts or acts makes people believe that it's sentient? Like, what are the characteristics that people are sort of pointing to as to say, yeah, we believe this has some sort of sentience? And then, in a completely like not very related note, but if these lights are some sort of higher dimensional being, should we trust them?
Okay, well, let's try and do them separately, I think. Okay. But, plasma is called plasma because it resembles the way that the plasma of our blood actually moves around the body. I mean, prior to it gaining that term, it was called radiant matter. And it was first, its existence was first realized by a British physicist by the name of William Crookes in the mid-19th century. And he did a lot of experiments. He created plasma. He did a lot of weird stuff with it. But it was, the name was changed into plasma as we know today, because it so resembled the actions of the plasma of the blood. That was the first indication. The next indication was that a number of physicists that were looking at the way plasma evolves and moves and acts suggested very strongly that it was making decisions. It was doing things off its own back. And this was something which, as I said, really puzzled David Bohm. And more recent work in Eastern Europe to do with plasma and to do with plasma balls, tiny balls that have been created of plasma, have shown, and I got the references to those, also show that they seem to be acting in a very sentient manner. In other words, that they are almost alive. When I say almost, alive without the almost, basically. In other words, they are alive.
So they're moving of their own volition, or is it like...
Well, okay, look, let me explain it to you. Let's say a glove that we wear, right? A glove is just made of cotton or wool or leather, and that's all it is. If it's on the table in front of you, it will never, ever move. But if you put it over your hand and start wiggling around your hand, it will look as if the glove has come to life. That's what these intelligences are to plasma. Okay. In other words, the plasma is a conduit. It's a link into a higher dimensional realm that allows this stuff to manifest into our world and quite literally take form. And it also possibly acts as a portal in its own right. In other words, these intelligences can become almost like guardians of these doorways or gates into other parallel realms, parallel worlds that can allow things to quite literally come from somewhere else to here, whether that be more physical UFOs or possibly what we call cryptids, different strange animals of time and space that appear at certain locations. Again, often locations that are known as portals that have intense geology. Obviously the most famous portal location in the world right now is Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. It's got its own TV show, reality show, basically. I've been there. I had the pleasure of going there during the making of this book, and I spoke to many people there that seen lights, and some of them were into the subject, some of them weren't, just workers there. There's no question, and it's got intense geology. It's got the exact geology that's required for the environment to produce this type of light phenomena. And there's an intelligence there. The guys working there, but feel that the intelligence is a single entity. And this is the big thing. In other words, the lights are simply the manifestations of something bigger that's going on there, an intelligence that knows who they are. And this brings us into your final question: is can we trust them? Well, it's a difficult one. I don't think we're dealing here with benevolent beings, but I don't think they're necessarily malevolent either. I think that if you want to look at it that way, you should see them as amoral. In other words, they can do whatever they like. And I think that they have been drip feeding humanity, nudging humanity in certain directions all the way along. Bear in mind that if they are multidimensional, they're outside of normal space-time. So they don't just exist in the here and now. If you make contact with one, they exist across all time. They're outside of normal time. So at the same time they're communicating with you, they could be communicating with, Moses on top of Mount Sinai, or somebody in the distant future, or even the guys at the Qesem Cave. Outside of our 3D reality and our one dimension of time going forward, everything becomes possible. So, when they think of us, you can't look at this in terms of some kind of deity looking down from above the clouds thinking, shall I intervene or not? It's far, far more complex than that. But here's the thing. I think that in some ways they could look at us like ants and an anthill, which we study. We do scientific papers of. Some people, extinguish, kill them or whatever. But here's the thing. If those ants suddenly got together one day, crawled up your wall and spelt out your name, you'd suddenly start taking a lot more interest in them. And I think
a bit freaked out.
That's what we've got to do. That's the importance of it. Not only have we got to recognize that they are there and can try to communicate with them, but to show them that we are ready to go on to the next level of existence, basically. I know that all sounds very new age and all the rest of it, but we've got to. I think, we're beginning to understand that there is something out there. It's not just ET. There's something else going on. And that plasma, transdimensionality, subjects we haven't even covered like quantum entanglement, whatever, are all crucial to gaining a better understanding of these intelligences, these beings, and what they mean to us.
So you think we should contact them, or should attempt to reconnect in that sense?
Curiosity, isn't it? We're always going to do it.
Well, you know what they say about the cat, right?
Well, there's no way that we're not. And here's the thing. If they have been involved with human progress all the way along, then it's quite clear that people a lot more smarter than us are already 2 steps ahead of us. And I'm talking about corporate think tanks. I'm talking about military organizations,
they're all obsessed with this shit.
That they could benefit from communications with this type of intelligence, and may even be employing things like shamans and whatever to try and ensure contact with these intelligences. Now, again, this all sounds very scientific. Science fiction, not scientific. But I think, and I have some evidence to suggest that some some big corps are very interested in this subject.
Oh yeah,
and
no, you don't need to sell me on that.
no,
They're definitely upset. Like there's some
yeah,
big corporations who are definitely obsessed with it.
definitely. I mean,
Um,
clearly I'd never name names, but think about it. Just think about it.
mm. Yeah, well, I mean, there's enough. Then you can go the whole way off the edge of the map if you really want. If you on that
Well,
discussion,
that's the problem. And I mean, obviously, I've tried to keep it real in the book Origins of the Gods, which obviously, as I said, is co-authored with Greg Little. Greg's part of it, by the way, focuses mostly on Native American traditions and shows that many tribes have been aware of these intelligences all the way along, and that many of their most intimate rituals are about communication with them to ensure their own existence and their own progress.
Mm. Do you think Gregory would be willing to come on for a chat?
I don't know. You'd have to talk to him.
Okay.
But I mean, basically, what we're doing is he's doing stuff and I'm doing stuff. That covers a much wider field. Then,
Well, true. I'm just being greedy, if I'm honest. So, as a final question, I want to try and wrap up on something good here. What do you think, or how would we say some rich person is listening right now and goes, hey, okay, maybe this guy's a point. Maybe we should be like trying to communicate with these beings. Where would you begin?
well, firstly, you find yourself a portal location,
Okay.
and
Where's your
not
favorite?
only-
Would you go to this? What
Well-
is it? Mount. What's the name of the mountain? I can't remember. Mount Gerizim. Yeah, that's it.
I mean, I've been there, and the trouble is that obviously it's very focused on certain religions there, of course. And I mean, a lot of it is to do with what we call human consciousness interaction. Because if you went, if you wanted to try and communicate with things or see a UFO or have a paranormal experience, where would you go? You wouldn't go to your local Tesco car park to do it, because your own consciousness is going to think nothing's going to happen. So that is going to make nothing happen unless there's some tradition that a ghost is always seen there at midnight on a certain day or something like that. But if you go to a location where, literally dozens and dozens of stories come out of that location that says lights appear, weird stuff happens, and all the rest of it, you're going to be more keyed up and focused. And that actually gives you a much better opportunity to interact with that landscape and whatever's going on there. I mean, literally, I truly believe that. And to interact with the entity, or what we call it, the egregore as a term, which basically means an entity that sucks up human consciousness, human thought and ideas, and then takes it on and creates, almost like an archetypal form, one that can then be seen and experienced and communicated with by local people. Now, if I was to go one place now, I'm in Britain, I live in Essex, it would be to a place called Bedford in Yorkshire. Okay. That's where incredible stuff has been seen over the past 20 odd years and historically as well. Because that is a place where you won't guarantee you could be there for months and not see something, but there is a very strong chance that you will see something eventually there, or certainly interact with something. And, you would do some experiments, you would do meditations, you'd do rituals, but you'd also use electrical equipment as well, try and record stuff. You've got to establish the two-way point of communication and accept the possibility that you can connect and communicate with these entities. And I think what's important here is that these egregores are the faces, that they're not end beings themselves, end-dimensional beings, but these intelligences can manipulate these archetypes for their own use. So in other words, if you go to some waterfall where there's supposed to be a white lady haunting it, you go there is the opportunity for, an end-dimensional being to take over that white lady to communicate with you. That's how they communicate with us. They haven't got normal form. Their energy, they are information. they are like a consciousness. They do not have physical bodies themselves. So the manner that they communicate with us is through appearing to us in any form that they need, whether it be, your dead Auntie Nellie or something, or, a spirit of an animal or an elemental or a little person or a giant or whatever. That's how they communicate with us. And will you know 100% that you're communicating with an n-dimensional being? No, of course. But sometimes those communications take on a incredibly different flavor and feel, and are so powerful and are so influential in what you do in your life. You think something else was going on there, something that was not simply my own mind or me contacting some local spirit or something like that. Something more was happening, and that's when this contact with N beings actually occurs. And of course, this has been going on throughout humanity. All of the different nexus points of humanity, I think, could have been influenced by n-dimensional activity. And, this is what I say. It's about nudging us in certain directions. Because in theory, if these beings exist outside of normal space-time, they know the outcome. Yeah. They know how the universe is going to end.
Yeah.
Well, so they know what's going to happen in your life.
It's like playing with, Sims or something. It's like, let's just see what happens.
But it's about triggering things. It's about triggering an individual into a certain course of life. And sometimes we might be lazy and almost overlook the opportunity, so we have to be nudged towards doing that. And that's how we think that they interact with us. But you have to put yourself out there and say, right, okay, well, hit me with it, whatever it is, I'm ready. And I call people that think that way agents of fate. I know it sounds like something out of a Marvel movie today, but no, I've been using it for a long time.
Oh, so you got the copyright? Okay.
Well, I should register it, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's so. In other words, I don't think you can prove the communication with these intelligences, but I think that human progress has been helped through these communications all the way along. And going back to what Eric von Daniken wrote in Chariots of the Gods, I mean, he was talking about spacemen coming down and helping us with knowledge of how to build the Great Pyramid or Stonehenge or the Nazca Lines. And yes, if you look at it now, it could be seen as a little naive, but I think he was onto something. I truly do. And we're taking that on to the next level today. And, obviously there are many TV shows and programs that are also coming along with this. I mean, obviously I myself am involved with Ancient Aliens, Unexplained, and various other ones. And, I try to engage them with the sort of alternative views of how we perceive UFOs, aliens, communication with higher intelligences. And I think to a small degree, it's beginning to work.
I think that's the first time the people on Ancient Aliens have ever been called anything approaching closed-minded. Those are not your words. It's funny that you're talking to considering alternative views for the Ancient Aliens people.
I mean, as I said, aliens exist, UFOs exist. They've been here for a very long time. You can make TV shows about them, no problems at all. But, and this is the big but, there's something else going on in the background as well. We need to understand that, and people need to know about it. Obviously in this show that we've recorded here, hopefully people will start thinking slightly differently about UFOs and what exactly they are and about the intelligences associated with them. And I think that the stigma has passed for the most part to do with having an interest in this subject. Yes, there's still a smile here and there, but if the US Navy, the US military, the US government are coming out and saying, no, they are actually real, which is what's happened over the past couple of years, then what stigma should there be anymore?
Well, probably none. But then just you kind of twigged my curiosity about. Have you read the book by Brian Murarescu, the Immortality Key?
No.
So he talks about the possibility of psychedelics in ancient Greece and in early Christianity as well.
All right.
About and how he believes that their wine wasn't specifically like wine. Like we would imagine that a lot of time it was grown to have psychedelic chemicals in it, or substances, or like the way they would let the berries mold, or the grapes mold. Anyway, he talks about a lot of like some of the most influential people from the ancient world all traveled to this place Eleusis in order take some sort of psychedelic substance and communicate with something, and they came back with like changed people. Like, do you think these sorts of stories are communicating with the same kinds of entities?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But they wouldn't have realized that. I mean, for them, they would have been communicating with their own gods, or God himself, or whatever. As I said, these things don't necessarily come through and say, look, we're something completely different. You can imagine them as something completely different if you want. You can put a mask on them, but that's all it will be, is a mask. They will appear, they will use whatever archetypes are already acceptable to you through cultural and religious upbringing. They could appear as alien greys if they want. As far as your interaction with UFOs, and obviously some people say, well, what about abductions and the rest of it? Well, a lot of those can be explained through coming too close to these plasma objects, entering electromagnetic fields, and entering into this extra dimensional environment, and quite literally being taken out of normal space time, and then regurgitated out, and finding that a few hours are missing, or a few days, or whatever, and being left with a mental experience of being aboard a craft, being examined by aliens or whatever. And I'm not saying this is not real. I think that, once again, it's a story that's being put to us to try and explain what, that's something that we cannot really fathom, because it's of a higher dimensional nature. So it thinks, right, what's the best thing to do? Oh, right, we'll just give them this story that they've been aboard a nuts and bolts spacecraft, put on a table, done this, done that, and then regurgitated out. I mean, again, we could talk for another hour on abductions. And again, here's the important thing. I'm not saying that these abductions didn't happen. They did, and they're very real to people. But we're not necessarily just talking about flesh and blood aliens in nuts and bolts spacecraft. We're dealing with entering into what we refer to as bubble universes, which literally open up to allow you to interact with these multidimensional environments for a set period of time. Now, because it's outside of normal space-time, there is no relation to normal time. In other words, although you may lose 3 hours in this world, out there, you're in a completely different environment. So time is going at a completely different rate. And of course, this goes back to things like fairy encounters in medieval times. There was a UFO writer called Jacques Vallée that wrote a book called Passport to Magonia, which basically said, look, everything that's happening in connection with UFO encounters and abductions today was going on in medieval times with the so-called fairies. It's the same thing. We've just updated it in our technological world. Back then, a person would be walking across a field, maybe past an earthen barrow, which suddenly there was this bright light coming out of it. They'd walk and they'd look into this bright light, and they would see fairies dancing and having a party. And the fairies would say, come in, come in. And they'd go in, and the person might eat something, they'd dance with the fairies, and only think that maybe an hour had passed. But when he comes out of that, according to the story, a year's gone by. Okay, this is exaggeration, these are legends, these are myths, whatever. But clearly it's the same type of idea, that if you go out of your normal accepted environment of existence and go into something else, you encounter something that you feel you're going to encounter. And when you come out of it, differences have occurred in normal space time, i.e. that you've lost a set period of time. I mean, some of these stories said, a year and a day has passed or whatever when they come out. I mean, there's one, for instance, where somebody's dancing with the fairies and their friend comes and rescues them and pulls them out by the arm and says, where have you been, And the guy says, I've just been dancing with the fairies for an hour. And he says, this happened, the others happened, days and days have passed and whatever. I mean, it's the same thing as alien abductions today, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Travis Walton story. A little bit.
Yeah, well, the Travis Walton story is a great, great story. I mean, obviously I've seen the film. I read the original book. Was it Fire from the Sky, whatever it was, or whatever. And I've never met Travis. I've seen videos of him on many occasions, and the guy's telling the truth, no question whatsoever. But the interesting factor is that his description of the object has changed across the years, and from an object of light to something far more structured, as if the only way that he can possibly interpret it is that it was a physical nuts and bolts spacecraft.
Yeah.
But, originally he saw an object of light, and, a very real one, that may have seemed as if it was physical. It may have even had physicality, but his description has changed. But I do genuinely believe his account. I genuinely believed he was somewhere else, and he came back and lost obviously several days in his case.
Yeah, I mean, there's too many interesting details that make it go what?
Oh yeah.
Like, they searched the spot where he was found like a week later.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that with to do with abductions, people having UFO encounters and things like that. That they will disappear. The spot will be searched, and then they'll reappear virtually at the same location. Obviously, sometimes they are found hundreds of miles away. I mean, there are many, many cases of this, but that's for another day.
Yeah. Anyway, I know I've taken up a lot of your time, Andrew, so I really want to thank you. This has been mind-blowing and fascinating in equal parts, and a lot of fun. So thank you very much, man.
That's great. Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, let's do the advert now if we can.
Yes, please.
No, I mean, obviously, otherwise the publishers get unhappy. Right, yeah, the book's called Origins of the Gods, co-authored with my good friend and colleague, Greg Little. Available now online, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, all good online bookstores. What else are we doing? I mean, we do trips to Turkey, Egypt, all the rest of it. All details on andrewcollins.com, which is my website. And if you are interested in anything that I've said and want to contact me or connect with me, there's an emailer linked to the website, and I'm on all social media. So, find me there and get in touch.
Yeah, I'll put links for all that stuff in the description for people.
Brilliant.
So they can find it.
Okay.
And yeah, man, if you're ever down in London at a loose end, give me a shout and we'll go for a beer.
Why not?
You can tell me about the Denisovans, so we actually get to that, since we didn't.
By the way, it's Denisovans.
Denisovans.
It's pronounced Denisovans. Yeah.
Denisovans.
So.
Okay, well.
But that's another whole show.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. But anyway, thanks very much, man. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. If you want to leave us a comment, that would be awesome. Please like, share, subscribe, and if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. Until next time, thanks for listening.